Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of quite possibly the world's biggest podcast on the very niche and very specific topic of wargaming the American Civil War in chronological order while investigating the impact the Lost Cause might have had on the way gaming depicts the conflict. This is episode 11 of We Intend to Move On Your Works, a division of the Homo Ludens Historical Gaming Media Network. My name is Alexandre Fontaine-Rousseau, and I am here today with Pierre Wagner-Jones and Stuart Ellis-Gorman to talk about Glory 3 by Richard Berg. Hi, guys.
Hiya. How you doing?
Oh,
So this game takes place literally 3 days after the last one that you played, if my sources are correct. So maybe we can do historical context a bit faster this time around. But Stuart, do you have anything you want to say before we get on with the game itself?
you do indeed. I always have too much to say. That's what everyone says about me.
No. Always just enough.
Yes.
So last time we were doing the Battle of South Mountain, which was Lee, having won the Battle of Second Manassas/Bull Run, has invaded the state of Maryland through the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the Battle of South Mountain was McClellan having discovered that Lee had divided his army once he'd crossed over the mountains, and in a very unusual McClellan move, in part because he discovered secret orders, and definitely one of the least plausible bits of writing in this entire war, has managed to attack through the mountains. That's what we played last time, was the Battle of South Mountain, which is a fight over some passes to get to where Lee's main army is. Eventually, McClellan, after a day's fighting, managed to drive through, and now the race is, can Lee unite his army and fight a pitched battle, or can McClellan pursue the individual pieces of Lee's army and defeat it all at once? So I think a little bit of important context as well about the Maryland campaign, which is what we call this campaign, because it's in Maryland, very original, was that the Confederates had expected basically to be welcomed as liberators. They sang a song called Maryland, My Maryland, which had been written in 1861 in response to the Baltimore riots. It is sung to the tune of O Tannenbaum. Just play that in your head. And it was actually the state anthem from 1939 to quite recently, which is a little gross. But it's a lot about this perceived solidarity between the Confederacy and Maryland, because Maryland was a slave state that had not seceded. So they expected that basically Maryland being suppressed by the Union, and that when the Confederate Army came, they would be welcomed, and then Maryland would rise up, and they would be given ample supplies. The problem with this plan is that they invaded West Maryland, and all of the plantations are in East Maryland. So they've invaded the Union loyal part of the state, and the army was very bedraggled at this point, having been on campaign since all the way back when we started playing Stonewall Jackson's Way 2. So it's been a long campaign. They don't have shoes. They're looting what they can find, and they were not welcomed at all. In contrast, the Army of the Potomac, when they start pursuing them, are greeted as heroes. This is the first time they have a chance to fight on home territory, and it really changes their experience. People come out and give them fresh food and bread. They cheer them on. It bolsters this really low morale point in the army to be in their home territory and to feel that sense of loyalty and excitement. Lee, on the 15th of September, so just about a day after South Mountain, deployed most of his army near Sharpsburg, Maryland, just west of Antietam Creek. When he'd invaded his army, he had split it, as I said. He had about 55,000 men for the initial invasion. About 20,000 of them, including Stonewall Jackson and A.P. Hill, had besieged Harper's Ferry, which is now in West Virginia. At this time, it would still be in Virginia, because there is no West Virginia. And they had been besieging it since about the 11th of September, I believe. They captured Harper's Ferry on the 15th of September. Jackson sent a message to Lee announcing his victory, and Lee said, basically, get the fuck up here, I'm about to fight a huge-ass battle. So Jackson took most of his troops and marched in that Jackson way extremely quickly to arrive at Sharpsburg in time for the battle, whereas he left A.P. Hill behind to kind of parole the Union captives and to seize what goods they could and oversee the aftermath. A.P. Hill would actually then march north and arrives about halfway through the battle. And fun side fact, they had stolen Union uniforms and marched in Union uniforms and confused some of the Union on their arrival.
Definitely a war crime. 100% a war crime.
Didn't like that.
Yeah.
McClellan had also arrived opposite Antietam Creek on the east side at around the 15th with the initial part of his army, and most of his army was there on the 16th. But McClellan being McClellan, he did not attack. Instead, he feared that Lee had this enormous reserve and this huge army. In fact, McClellan had about 72,000 men. At this point, Lee had about 37,000 men. So McClellan had about a 2-to-1 on Lee, but still didn't attack at all on the 16th and would only attack on the 17th. Now, I'll spare the actual full details of the battle. Antietam is the single bloodiest day in American history. For some reason, McClellan attacked in piecemeal, sending forth individual divisions, refusing to commit all of his forces, again fearing that Lee had this huge reserve, and that if he went all out, then he would be crushed by the reserve. Both armies lost about 30% of their overall strength at Antietam, and while Gettysburg would be bloodier on the whole later in the war, Gettysburg is 3 full days. Antietam is just 1 day, has the same casualties as the Battle of Shiloh did, which was 2 days. So it really shocked people with the level of casualties. This is also one of the first battles to be photographed, where photographers came down from New York and photographed the aftermath and the bodies strewing the field. A fun side fact is that because it took them several days to get there, the Union buried all the Union dead first, because they did win a small victory here. And when the photographers came, they photographed all the Confederate dead, which were still out because they hadn't been buried yet. And it gave the impression to people that this was a greater Union victory than it was, because all they could see were the Confederate dead.
It's fascinating.
It is really
That's fun.
interesting. Yeah.
So McClellan won a small tactical victory, they said, small enough that Lee would actually claim some degree of victory in later years, particularly the idea that he had saved his army from an overwhelming force rather than being destroyed, kind of skipping over the whole this was like his invasion. But McClellan did successfully force Lee back across the river and into Virginia. He didn't destroy the army, which is obviously what Lincoln wanted him to do, but it was a small victory. And in that regard, it has kind of a few main legacies that are very impactful. In some ways, Antietam is the single most important battle of the American Civil War. And the outcomes are kind of a bit aside from the actual what happened on the field. The big one is that Lincoln had decided that he was going to issue what we call the Emancipation Proclamation, which would free all enslaved people in Confederate states. He was waiting to have a victory to release it because he thought if he released it on a string of losses, it would look like a last flailing gesture. So Antietam, he decided, was a big enough win, so he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and this changes the war from a war of reunion to a war of emancipation. It has very long impacts on what the war means and what the war is going to look like and what the possible outcomes of the war are going to be. Following on from that, and from the extremely high casualties of the battle, Lincoln begins to give permission for allowing black soldiers to join the Army of the Potomac, or the Union Army. That will still take some time. We don't really see that for several months into like early 1863, and it takes even longer for them to become more accepted in the Army. But this is, again, a big shift and will also have a huge impact later on in the war, particularly with how the Confederacy will react fighting black soldiers. The victory is in mid-September, so it's the 17th of September, in 1862, which is also Lincoln's midterm elections. So coming off the back of this victory, and as I said, those photographs and that perception that this was a bigger victory than it was, helped see the Republican Party into a very solid midterm performance, which then meant Lincoln retained all of his majorities in Congress and was able to keep pursuing the war on the terms that he wanted to pursue it. So that was a huge political victory for him, and very much made possible by Antietam. And then following on from that political victory and from his frustrations with McClellan, he decided to fire McClellan. So that after the election, McClellan is gone, he's no longer around, and we have this huge change then in how the Army of the Potomac is going to function and enter the post-McClellan phase of the war. So these are all really big impacts that mean that Antietam is kind of a watershed moment in the American Civil War. Even if it's not as dramatic in the field as something like Gettysburg, this really is probably the single most impactful battle in terms of how it shapes the war.
So about the game itself, I mean, it's a Richard Berg game, which implies some complexity, at least. Is there a rule for like the lack of shoes or stuff like that? How detailed is this game?
Well, mechanically, I'd say this is in a really nice spot for me, at least. I mean, the other big sort of heavy American Civil War game we've played on this podcast is the Great Battles of the American Civil War, GBACW, and it is a lot simpler than that. You can definitely see the similarities, visually especially, with the counters, how they're set up. But at one glance of the game, you can see it's simpler. There's fewer numbers to worry about. There's fewer rules to worry about. There's still command control, but again, it's a bit simpler. It's still chit draw, but again, it's a bit simpler. I think it's in a really sort of sweet spot. I think if anyone's played Great Battles of the American Revolution, it's slightly more complex than that, but a lot less complex than the Great Battle of the American Civil War, and that is a really nice spot for me. I think we were comparing it quite often in complexity, maybe to the Men of Iron system that Stuart and I really enjoy. We find that it's a really similar level, and that like there's enough there to bite your teeth into, and really dig around with the details, but it's not too much that you're wrestling with the rule book rather than sort of the game.
Yeah, which is what
the
happened
enemies.
when you played the game from the
Yeah.
Great Battles of the American Civil War. You were basically stuck in the woods and not
Exactly.
getting out of them or the rule book.
Exactly. And I think this is quite a nice game to solo as well. There aren't too many counters on the board, but there's enough to do interesting stuff. It's chit draw, so it's even nicer than I think like Men of Iron, for example, that is similar to this. Where Men of Iron is definitely sort of requiring you to react to your opponent's move, and if you're playing solo, I enjoy playing that solo, but you know, it requires a bit of abstraction and for you to like put yourself in the other shoe. Whereas with a chit draw system, it does it for you, and it's a lot more natural and it flows a lot quicker. I mean, Stuart, what do you think with the complexity?
I think so. It's about 12 pages of rules. We should draw a slight line on this and just say that. So there's 3 volumes in Glory. We played Antietam is in Glory 3. That's what we played. We also played a little bit of First Manassas to kind of learn the system, which is in Glory 1. Glory 1 was released in 95, the same year as the GMT 3 Days of Gettysburg, which is the first of the kind of modern GBACW titles, which I think is an interesting fact to know that I don't know if Berg designed them at the same time, but they came out at the same time, both from GMT. So I think they are very easily paired. Now, when Glory 2 came out in 2002, there was a fairly substantial rules overhaul. A lot, I think, for clarity and simplification, and it's a much simpler system. And there are some backdating of counters and things to make Glory 1 compatible, but it is a little bit fiddly. Glory 1, if you own all 3 volumes, you get all the errata counters, and then I think it's a bit easier. But if you just own one of them, Glory 1 is very different, as I just tell people, if you just play Glory 1 on its own. Now, Glory 2 and Glory 3 are much more consistent, and they're fairly straightforward. There's not a ton of rules overhead. There is still that little bit of weird Berg chrome that you get in there. You can't leave it out. There's, fun little... Although I made fun a lot of a rule where... So you round towards it's got strength odd DRM modifiers, and you round towards the defender, but if you're both in clear terrain, then you round towards the attacker. I made fun of this a lot, but actually it felt kind of impactful. It came up quite a bit in our game, and it did feel like it shifted the DRMs enough that it was kind of interesting.
I can imagine that, honestly.
Yeah. The rule where your cohesion modifier is reduced if you're cavalry charging somebody in the woods is probably a bridge too far. But like, it's got a little bit of that, but it's very minor. And I'd say it is probably, I would say, about Men of Iron complexity or Battles of the American Revolution, much simpler than GBACW, but it still gives a lot of that satisfying chip pull activation. It's great. I really liked it.
Yeah, and you do want those details from a Richard Berg game, but at this point, it's part of the Richard Berg mythology that you're going to get a little of these odd little nooks and crannies.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes down to like the naming of the units, It goes down really... Yeah, it's a simple thing, but a lot of games don't have the names of the units, the name of their commander. It's pretty easy to pass on the board what's happening. I would say that, I don't know, it's not the prettiest. In the scenario we played for Antietam, all of my, I don't know, with a lot of these battle games, especially GMT games, a lot of other systems actually, like their sub-unit that, like a brigade that a unit is part of, will have like a coloured bar at the top, right? All of the Union who I was playing, all of them, even if they're part of different areas or under different commanders, are brown. And you feel like, I don't know, system-wise, I know it's for a reason. They are all under like the same army, right? They're in the 9th.
It's easier to follow, Pierre. Don't complain about the brown everywhere.
It was all brown
for practical reasons.
They could have added a bit of more flair of color. It's the typical GMT counters as well visually, where it's like a unit shooting out
weird colors in a war game. I'm sorry, I've never.
But it's nice.
It's the Roger McGowan special.
Yeah, exactly.
On the counter.
Exactly. I mean,
you know what that is.
You know exactly what you're getting. That said, it was nice seeing like the uniforms on some of the Confederate troops be blue. As to what Stuart alluded to earlier of like the people who stole the uniforms. That's cool to see. It gives a bit of flair. It's nice. I think it looks nice. It looks like a typical GMT hex and counter game made within the last 20 years, and exactly what I mean when I say that.
Yeah.
I will say fun little fact is that Glory 1 has Rick Barber maps and Glory 2 and 3 I think have Simonage maps.
That's right.
There's a fun little twist.
It is a
Yeah,
bit.
information. And it's interesting. I was listening to you talk about it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I do remember some elements of that system because I played a bit of Jour de Gloire,
Mhm.
which is a Napoleonic system by Frédéric Bey, and it is based on the work that Berg did on this system, if I remember correctly."
Exactly. I'm pretty sure that's right. So I think Jour
Mm.
de Gloire span off from this system. It's different. I would say it's different. It doesn't use the same. Like there are quite a few differences between the systems, especially in how the chit draw works. I would say Jour de Gloire is maybe very slightly more complex, and obviously art-wise it's different. Their main publisher is Victis. They've got a whole house style. It looks beautiful, and it's a different period that it's simulating. I've played a decent bit of Jour de Gloire, and I've played, not too much, as Stuart says, 2 games of Glory. I think I feel more comfortable with Glory. I think the system is more to my liking. I see more Berg in it. I see more Berg in the combat results table. I think I think Stuart might jump in here with some of the historical background, but the CRT, the combat results table, didn't feel super bloody in this game, which I found a little odd, right? Because this was meant to be a bit of a bloody battle.
Stuart is ready to
Yeah.
jump. He's just like,
No, I get that. I want to say at first though that I love the CRT. I think the CRT is fucking
That's what I'm
amazing.
saying. Yeah, I love the CRT in play, in mechanics, but it's not very bloody, and I think that has rubbed people along a bit the wrong way.
I mean, yeah, it has that same kind of thing that we talk about with that environment where like you flip to disordered, and then it actually reminds me a bit of when more topical of something like Rebel Fury that's just come out,
Ooh.
because it has when you flip to disordered, then you get another disordered result. You're withdrawn,
Mm-hmm.
and you go to the separate box, and then at the end of the turn you have to roll for all the withdrawn units to see who's eliminated, and then who gets to re-enter play. And then the ones who re-enter play all come back in near your leaders with they're still in their disordered state. So it does remind me. It kind of reminded me of that Rebel Fury system there, where you have the blown result and they go off map and then they return later. I will say, I wonder if part of that as well is that in original Glory 1, there was more of a routing mechanism, and that was because it was they had first bull run as one of the battles in that. So you had more counters streaming across the board and routing, and then he abstracted that out till they go off map boxing. Yeah, it does feel more like units fleeing rather than being killed.
Yeah.
Before we get onto that, I do want to say the thing I love about CRT is that everything is a result. There's no result,
Yes.
and every result is impactful.
That's so nice.
And there's only like 4 results on the CRT. If you're attacking, there's like really bad for you, good, kind of good for you, really good for you. That's the whole CRT.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. It's so
We
yeah,
go
no result is a bit anticlimactic. let's
exactly,
face
and we
it.
go back to this quite a lot with our favorite game in this series so far, Manassas, of that feeling of flow in the battle. That every turn, when you look away and look back, something has happened. Be it even just a small retreat or like a bit of movement in the line. That's so nice, and it keeps you engaged in the game, and it forces you to make an interesting decision every single turn, which I really really liked with this. There's a lot of maneuver in this game at this scale, which you don't usually get, especially in these sort of linear warfare games. Where you are usually drawing up lines against each other, shooting. ACW games does have a bit more maneuver than that, but that's the core, really. It was good. It was cool to see, I found.
I think it prevents that thing that's always annoying in a war game where you're making the same attack again and again.
Exactly.
Like you're never going to make the same attack in this game because every attack is going to do something horrible to someone. And that means that the next attack is always going to be different. And that's really exciting. It makes the game feel really engaging. What I would say about that retreat heavy CRT element is that I think probably the flaw in Glory, if there's one major criticism I have of it, is the battle selection across the 3 volumes. Like, it's got Chancellorsville and Antietam. Chancellorsville, Glory 2 is Chancellorsville and Fredericksburg. And Glory 3 is Antietam and Cedar Creek, which is the 1864 battle, which we may talk about another time. And Glory 1, I think, is the best choice because it's the 2 Bull Runs and Chickamauga. But on the whole, there's a tendency towards these big, really violent battles. And to me, this is a system for the smaller scale battles like Cedar Mountain, I would love, like, there's a GBACW pack called Valley of Death. That's or Death in the Valley, whatever. It's the Valley battles, and it's a box of just individual Valley battles. And I would love a Glory version of that. Because I think those small Valley battles, the Kearns Towns, the Cross Keys, those would be absolutely amazing in the system. This is the system to me for those smaller battles, the kind of battles you see in Blind Swords a lot, and not so much for the Antietam's. Like we played the smaller Antietam scenario, which is just Burnside's attacking what's now known as Burnside's Bridge near the end of the day, and AP Hill's arriving to counter him. And that was fun. It was really manageable. I've looked at the main Antietam battle. It's like people say 10 to 12 hours to play that.
Yeah.
And I don't think Glory is a system for a 10 to 12 hour big full scale Antietam. I wouldn't play Gettysburg in this system. I want to play these smaller multi-hour engagements, and I think like First Bull Run is like the perfect one for this system, which makes one reason makes it annoying. The Glory one is that difference, so updating back to it's that bit more fiddly, because that kind of battle, the CRT fits beautifully. Where those 1861-62 battles, particularly the less bloody ones, where there's lots of routing and morale issues, and interesting Western theater battles. I would love to have seen it tackle those and not try and do like the big battles. Like Chancellorsville is like 3 maps in this, so I think that's probably the issue to me in this. The system is really good, and my critique of it would be that I don't think Berg picked the right battles.
But I think we see
that's interesting.
We see it as well in other systems like the Blind Swords system, where we think kind of similar thoughts, right? That we don't think that works
for sure
with a huge scale. I just don't think that's either especially fun or an especially good simulation either of the battle itself. And I don't know, we finished this. Was it one session we finished this in, Stuart, or was it 2?
Yeah.
It was 1, wasn't it?
We did one session.
It's really nice to be able to play this in a couple of hours.
Long.
Yeah.
One session game they're not that easy to come by, and they're not always as satisfying as the longer thing. But
exactly. And I think it was satisfying, this one. And you do have, I don't know, there's the cavalry, the artillery. You do have that bit of extra flavor to play within here. I'd say the troops are also in this battle at least pretty equal across the board, right? Like they're pretty, like they stand toe to toe to each other. Strength rating wise, cohesiveness wise, firepower, whatever the rating's called, which is cool to see. I think the Confederates tend to have a bit more cohesion, but hey, and there's a few extra rules that add to their.
Is that the moment where we start speaking about like certain historical biases? Is that? Did I hear a bell ring?
Certain flags present in the in the battle, maybe.
Oh man, the covers of these games are killer, man. You should look at the box art. The Glory one it's a cool piece of art, but it is like a nameless rebel soldier waving the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia, but just like he looks so cool.
Yeah.
It's real like ACW version of those cool SS dudes you get in all the World War II games. And then the second one is just like a really tacky memorial to Stonewall Jackson, basically. It's wonderful. It's got him in the middle and like Confederate flags everywhere. Like the background is like a faded Confederate flag, and then there's Confederate flags, and there's Jackson looking all heroic, and just it's Chancellorsville, and
that illustration and the title "Glory," there might be a bit of a
yeah.
It's a weird one. But I think in the game it didn't really stand out to me. It didn't feel that
mechanically
ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it didn't
mechanically.
Yeah, not at all. They use the battle flag for the generals. We've talked about that a million times, I think. It doesn't. I don't know. This might be a bit of a niche conversation. What do you think about flags for leaders and commanders versus little portraits?
I think people are here for the niche conversations. Yeah. No subject is too niche for this podcast. Come on.
I agree with Stuart. I agree. I like portraits. I think they're nice, and I think the American Civil War is probably one of the few battles, like from this point on, where you do, or from this point before, where you do have every single leader photographed.
You have pictures of them all, and a lot of them are really distinct looking. Like we talk about the beards sometimes, but they have different beards. Like a lot of them have big ones, but they're distinct beards. You can
they all have personality. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's a great system. I think really, really cool. I want to explore it more. I think I don't want to explore any bigger ones, and it's annoying that I want to explore it more means there are 3 games in the system. But then, I don't know, part of me is like, it's a completed thing. It's never going to be another one. Let's just play in these and be happy with it.
Yeah, nobody has been talking about taking back the mantle. Or
I don't think they would, because I think GBACW, sorry, the Great Battles of the American Civil War, I think that fits their GMT's publishing style. of like Grand Tactical American Civil War game. Obviously, Rebel Fury's just come out, but I think that sits in a different slot a little bit. I would say Blind Swords is the nearest thing to this for me, if I want to get the feel of this, and I might actually prefer Blind Swords, but I think the CRT is great in this, and I think it's Berg. I don't know. Is it Berg at his best? Is it Berg? This isn't his best game,
it's
but
definitely.
like, it's
top tier Berg. The Berg here is really strong. I also really want to call out the defensive fire rules, which I really like.
Yeah,
they're really clean because basically everyone unit has a cohesion, and when you attack someone before you attack, they just roll a d10, and if they roll higher than your cohesion rating, you're disordered and your attack fails.
Yeah.
And the only wrinkle on that is that if you attack from multiple hexes, what they can do is they can defensive fire all of your units, but they take a DRM penalty for that. And then artillery get a bonus to represent canister if you attack them. And I really like specifically the artillery one because a lot of games I've played, particularly like the Worthington system, the artillery just kills more people at that range.
Yeah.
But really what canister would do is it kill a lot of people, but it would also absolutely kill the momentum of a charge.
Yeah.
And that's what it does here. And what the game does, if you don't do that, the artillery falls immediately. They can't fight in close combat.
That's what I
The thing I like about it is it hits that sweet spot that's key, I think, particularly in American Civil War games, of attacking always feels bad, but you have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, it's always worse to be the attacker than the defender in this period of warfare. And it makes you stress because you are worried about doing your attack. But there are things you can do to try and mitigate it, and it always feel you have to attack, and it doesn't then make it feel unpleasant from a play experience, right? It's exciting. You're going to resolve it quickly. You're not going to sit there and be like, I'm attacking, let's add up 8 numbers, roll a die, do this modifier, look it up on this table, and then something happens. It's like, no, we're going to do this, we're going to do it quick. You know, we can roll a d10, we don't have to look up the rules for it. It's really clean, and it's, I think, a really nice piece of design that I really, really liked. So that's chef's kiss. Good job, Richard Berg.
It's good, and like on top of that, the scenario design. I think the victory point hexes being in Sharpsburg itself, but also on my side of Sharpsburg, on the Union side of Sharpsburg, near the river as well, really encourages me to initially go for those victory hexes that are close to me, and then try and capitalize on that and move forwards again. And that feels really good and feels really engaging. When all the victory hexes, I don't know, within 8 hexes of each other, maybe something like that, 6 hexes of each other.
Tight.
It's really tight. But I can approach it from different angles. I can feasibly do a few different tactics to do it, and that felt really, really good in play.
I also liked how disordered units can't attack at all, but they only have a -1 penalty to that defensive fire, so they're still very good at it.
Yeah.
So you can have this tension because you can return from being disordered if you pull away from the enemy units, like in kind of Men of Iron, except you have to roll to do it in this. In Men of Iron, it's automatic. In this, you have to roll, which I think is better, honestly.
Yeah.
But you have that option of like, okay, do I pull my line back and do I try and restore them? Or do I leave all these disordered units out there to be in your way?
Yeah.
Because it's still a pain in the ass for you to attack them. Because they're not that much worse in combat. They just can't launch an assault. So that ebb and flow as well of like, and that also makes it very hard because the CRT is so significant and the defensive fire is there. Often when you attack with a unit, even if you do well, you're going to end up disordered. So you need to hit people in waves. You need to stack how your attack's going to go. You can't just like, hero mode your way through with 2 good units. It becomes much harder than to coordinate these big attacks, which is, the core of the warfare is it's what you want to feel as a general when you're playing these games.
Yeah,
how do I coordinate all this? So I think it very cleanly, very little rules load in that achieves a lot feeling like the American Civil War.
And it does feel like it values defensive thinking a lot, which I like.
Yeah, especially because, in the scenario design again, the Confederates start on the road away from Sharpsburg, and all of the hexes the Union need to get are in Sharpsburg. So you've got to have that defensive thinking as the Confederates, but also you have to book it down the road to actually get there in the first place. And it's chit pull, so like you might not get the right chits pulled at the right time. And like the Union are starting pretty much parallel to you as well, going down that road. So what I did, I tried to sort of scuffle up his plans a little bit by intercepting him down the road and then getting my northern contingent to go north into Sharpsburg. Didn't work. It ended up being a draw, I think, right?
We ended up on a draw, which I claimed victory on. But yeah, it was a draw.
Well, the public didn't see the photographs, so...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How many bodies? I need to see the bodies.
Exactly.
General Lee wrote to Richmond to say that he won, so...
So, in the grand scheme of things, like you've mentioned other systems, where do you think this one sits, really?
I Oh.
I mean, talking just systems, I think I like Blind Swords a little more, but I think with the right battles, it would be very, very close. I think the issue I have with Glory is I think it needs more of these smaller battles. It needs more battles like First Bull Run, which is great. And I think a perfect fit for the system. And like I own the first 2 volumes. I'm probably gonna try and track down the third one. Obviously, this is all super out of print. The last volume 3 came out in like 2007.
And are they expensive now?
Not really. They're
not super. They're not very beloved. So
Yeah.
it's not too bad. I got my first 2 from the Shop of Nils, Paris, France. Would recommend.
Yeah.
And so I do want to dig into Chancellorsville a little bit, actually, because you can play. There's a huge Chancellorsville scenario, but actually that one they've carved up into lots of different scenarios over individual map sheets. So I am really keen to dig into that more. I think I like Blind Swords more, but if I was going to design a game, I would design it in Glory.
I agree.
Oh, wow.
I think I agree. Yeah, yeah, I genuinely agree with that. And I think I would have. I think Glory is definitely my favorite GMT system so far. Unquestionably.
Spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers. Unquestionably.
As opposed to which systems that you have yet to speak.
You'll have to listen
about.
to next episode, Alexander. Yeah. Listen to next episode.
Yeah, I'm already projecting myself into the future.
I think I don't know. I think I need to play more Blind Swords. I've played the first Kernstown on my own outside of this podcast, which Alexander, you generously gifted to me. Second Kernstown, I want to get to the table. I really enjoyed soloing it, but then I really enjoy soloing this. So
yeah, but first Kernstown is a good example of like a really nice small scale engagement that really works with the Blind Sword system. Like if you look at the initial situation, you might be like, what is there to this battle? But there's so much movement and so much like it's really a good entry point into the Blind Sword system.
But I think I feel more at home in the berginess of this game.
You're a Bergian at heart.
Oh, I'm a Berghead. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely are. I like the CRT more in this one. I like the simplicity where it's simplified in Glory is really nice. And this misses some of the interesting depth that Blind Swords has. The event chip pull in Blind Swords is better because the chip pull in Blind Swords is amazing. But I like the way the combat resolves in this one. Even though Blind Swords has really cool combat, and I absolutely it's great. It's really interesting, but I like the simplicity.
I would recommend people trying Jour de Gloire as well.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I mean, people check out the Homely Den's YouTube channel where Fred has just interviewed Frédéric Bay, who has.
And we also played a game.
Yes, we also played a game of it on it. There, yeah, amazing. Yeah,
it's in French though. That's in French. All of that content.
All of that is French content. So but if you don't speak French whilst listening to this podcast, what are you doing?
There's a paywall that is like knowing French, but
the second half of this podcast is going to be entirely in French as well. So you should start learning now. Because then you'll be able to follow. Because once we get to 1863, it's going to be French for the rest of the war.
It's French all the way. Yeah.
For historical reasons, obviously.
But I think the system's really good, and more importantly, they're pretty much all magazine games. Super cheap to get. I don't know. If you're in the UK, you can get them you can order them from France for like £15 shipped, which is insane for a game.
I think Invictus shipped to the US. I know some people in the Homelidens Discord have ordered from them. Mark Johnson of Wargames to Go gets them. They seem to be very affordable. And there's a C3I one as well. Is EC is that that's EC in with Gettysburg? Is that Jour de Gloire? Yeah. So
that's right.
If you own Mark Herman's Gettysburg, then you already own one. And like me, you haven't played it, but you should play it.
But give it a go and see if you like the system, because I think it flows really well. It's a nice, relatively light system as Napoleonic systems go. As is this, it's a relatively light system as American Civil War systems go. Wish there were more, but then 3 games with like 4 battles in each game. That's quite a lot, right?
For Glory?
Yeah.
It's 3 in Glory 1. There's only 2 battles in Glory 2, but Chancellorsville has like 5 scenarios. And then the Glory 3 has just, I think, 3 scenarios. It has 2 battles. It's Antietam and Cedar Creek, which we may, spoilers, come back and play Cedar Creek, which is a really cool 1864 battle that doesn't get enough games about it. So
yeah, I'm very keen to do that. Yeah, I'm very keen to I think that's the key. I'm very keen to revisit this. It doesn't do everything right.
It's Berg, baby.
It's Berg. It's a little rough around the edges.
What does everything right?
Exactly. I mean, what are the pieces? What's the bit that maybe you didn't love the the most, Stuart, about the system? Because for me, what do you think? For me, it's definitely the bloodiness of it. It didn't feel bloody at all. It felt like we were sort of pushing each other back. I really enjoyed that mechanically. I thought that was really fun. But I can see how some people might be a bit frustrated. In my mind, I can really abstract that and say, like, whilst yes, physical points aren't going down, counters aren't being removed from the board or anything, I am abstracting it where, like, losing ground is maybe more important than showing how you've lost men on the battlefield. I think that's fair. But a lot of people won't, and I understand that point of view too. What do you think, Stuart? What's your?
I think my biggest gripe is still what I said before, which I think the battles are wrong for it. I think this is a small scale battle system, and not like I just wouldn't play the full Battle of Antietam in this system, and that's kind of disappointing when you consider that's half of Glory 3 basically. Yeah. Full Battle of Antietam. I'm curious to try Chancellorsville because it has these one map, and Chancellorsville is several days. Because I have a thing where I don't like playing parts of battles. I don't like playing like a wing of a battle. I want the full picture. But at least in Chancellorsville, you can play like the whole of May 2nd, and it's like a distinct chunk of battle. It doesn't feel like there's a wing over here I need to be worried about. So I'm curious to try that one and dig into it a bit more and see if that is also true of Chancellorsville, which is a very different kind of large battle. But I just wish there were these smaller battles and these, because I want to play this in 1 to 2 hours on a little single map sheet with like 50 counters. That's what I want, and that's not really something it offers me in a lot of ways. So, I want magazine games. I want Jour de Gloire magazine games, but Civil War.
But in some regards, it's like a marketing issue too. The people usually want these big battles that they know. Like it's not as easy to sell like these niche little engagements. So maybe that's part of the reason why they ended up doing these bigger battles instead of doing like smaller battles that would have been more appropriate given the system itself. But
they could be selling a big boxed kind of game as opposed to, Blind Swords can kind of do it because they're doing these little folios, and they have boxed. You can get boxed versions, but you can also get them all as folios. They're quite minimal in what they have in them, so they can keep costs down versus. Yeah,
and it's their shtick basically at this point.
But I would see like a Men of Iron where it has like 6 battles in it. None of them are that big. I would love to see that approach.
I think what I'm frustrated by is I don't know that GMT ended up going with GBACW in the end rather than this. I think both systems have their merit. GBACW, we've been harsh on it. We want to revisit it. We want to try it again, and we are going to, and I think maybe with a battle that's more suited to the system. And we'll see how we feel about it there. But I just wish that they went with this rather than that.
You've just gained an awesome amount of Grognard point right there by being like, oh, I have like this other system that I prefer to the one that has become more popular nowadays. Like you've aged incredibly in this. Yeah. You're like 20 years older in like a single session of this podcast.
I'm just trying to see when Glory 1 came out. Was it
95, baby.
Before you were born.
Before I was born.
That's really funny. You're nostalgic of an era that you never knew.
That's wargaming for me, man. It's the whole hobby.
So, do you want to do the crossbow rating system, the official crossbow rating for this game, or do you want to skip to another system, or do you want to not give a rating? I'm not sure how to conclude this, but usually there's a crossbow-related note given at the end of these podcasts.
I moved on, Alexander. I just finished my second book, which is on 100 Years' War Battles. So I will give this, I would say, 96 out of 113 years.
That's like a seismic shift in the notation system.
That should be 116 years. 96 out of 100.
It's really hard. It's going to be really hard to I'm just doing the math right now, and I'm just like, ooh, that's.
We're going to have to shift to a base 170.
How about you?
I think it's a solid 7 out of 10. I want more. I want better scenarios. I think the alternative is like other systems, which are like 6 out of 10 for me, at this scale.
Speaking of other systems,
what are we playing next time?
Next time, we're going to definitely, no spoilers. I mean, we're still forming our opinion on this, to be fair. But next time, we're going to play Rebel Fury by Mark Herman. Which we definitely haven't already started playing.
Big hype on Rebel Fury right now. It's what all the kids are.
And everyone
all
loves
the kids
it.
are talking about Rebel Fury right now. Yeah.
Oh, we've played it, but just for context, we've
Hmm.
played one sort of learning scenario. We're going to play another to get our teeth into it fully. But yeah, I think we'll have things to say.
Look forward to that.
That's good. That's what we do these podcasts for. I think that's all for us today. Thanks everyone for listening, and thanks Pierre and Stuart for doing this once
Thanks.
again.
Thanks.
It's been great.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.
The despot's heel is on thy shore. Maryland, my Maryland. His torch is at thy temple door. Maryland, my Maryland. Avenge the patriotic gore that flecked the streets of Baltimore, and be the battle queen of yore. Maryland, my Maryland. Thou wilt not cower in the dust. Maryland, my Maryland, thy beaming sword shall never rust. Maryland, my Maryland, remember Carroll's sacred trust. Remember Howard's warlike thrust. And all thy slumberers with a joy